fellow chess players, I'm Grandmaster Max Lingworth, and in this video I'll be showing you the 2 phases of me becoming a FIDE master, showing you basically what to do so you can achieve this for yourself as well. So there are basically 2 phases to this, one being in 2007 to early 2008, and then a second phase in late 2009 to early 2010. So basically, the first phase I share is where I got to a 2250 FIDE rating and a national rating of 2300 plus. Because what I noticed that with 2200 players is that at this level, the 2200 players have different styles and somewhat different strengths and weaknesses. So first, it's important to understand what the baseline is of what you kind of need to do to get to that sort of level where you can start thinking about going to 2300. Because it may well be in a situation where you're already at a high rating, but there's just one big weaknesses holding you back, where you might be 2300 already in all of these areas, but because you're only 2000 in this one particular area, that you're therefore not really getting to the level, of your other parts of your game. So the first part was where I was basically playing a very narrow repertoire, let's say up until 2007, where I was playing, the Queen's Gambit approach as whites, and sort of playing in a very direct fashion with knight c3, and often playing for the e4 break in a lot of different lines, going for a more light squared kind of approach to the positions. And then with black, I also had a very narrow repertoire where basically since my very earliest years of playing chess competitively, I was playing the Sicilian Sveshnikov, the lines where you go e5 in the open Sicilian. And against d4 as black, I was playing the King's Indian against pretty much everything. And that was basically my set systems. But what I found was that because I was only playing these systems for my whole lifetime, I had a very narrow kind of understanding of different types of positions. And so a big part of me making the big jump from, let's say, a solid 2-100 level and having some decent tactical vision from solving a lot of tactics puzzles, well, there were kind of 2 key transformations. The first one was I started getting coaching from a grandmaster. That is Grandmaster Ian Rogers, Australia's first grandmaster. I remember I'd have these 3-hour coaching sessions each week with him whenever he was in Sydney. And that really helped me to get my understanding to a much higher level. I remember that at first when we were working together, we focused on basically improving my existing openings to try and improve my understanding of the King's Indian, of the Sveshnikov as black, and improving my d4, c4 repertoire as white, make sure I knew it more, the existing lines that I was playing more deeply. But then when I sort of started to move up to 2150 level, what I found was I needed to add different systems, because the ones I was playing, my opponents were very well prepared for, but they would just prepare some line and would seem to know it better than me, especially when I was playing against high-rated players. This was coming up as a big problem, especially in my black openings, where I remember, for example, the one line that really put me off the King's Indian was actually the main line with knight f3, castles, bishop e2. And I was having a lot of trouble in these closed positions with knight c6, d5, and knight e7, where my opponents were just prepared much more deeply and knew the lines a lot better than I was. Better than I did, where somehow the position just suited them a lot better. And often the bayonet in particular was a line that was giving me a lot of headaches, where I'd kind of research how to play the positions after my games, but still it felt like it was much easier to play white, who had just much more direct ways of attacking than black had to defend. So ultimately, after the Malaysian Open 2007, I had this game against, I think, a 2000 rated player who just completely destroyed me with the 4 pawns attack. And that was the moment where I said, okay, I'm not going to play the King's Indian anymore. I'm sick of losing heaps of games to my opponents in this opening. And so I decided to make a transition to playing much more solidly in the opening, starting in late 2007, where I decided to learn the Nimzo Indian. And because the Nimzo has already quite a few different variations to learn and to master, I decided against knight f3 not to learn an absolute mainline system, but instead to kind of learn a solid sort of system that I could quickly start playing. That was in a similar spirit to the Nimzo, where I learned the Bogo Indian, and I would basically go for, again, this very dark squared strategy, where I get the pawns on d6 and e5, and get a kind of similar structure to what I was getting in the King's Indian, but where I was trading off this bad dark squared bishop early in the game to get a more positionally natural play, at least for my style at the time. And that change actually alone led to a big improvement, where I'd say that the jump that for me getting from 2150 to 2250 basically came down to 2 main things. And the first one was giving up the King's Indian and playing much more solid against d4. It meant I went from losing all of my games against 200-300 plus players to actually drawing quite a few of my games against IMs, even getting a draw with a Grandmaster with black in the 2008 Australian Championship. which was sort of my breakthrough tournament where I went from 2-150 to a nearly 2-250 rating very, very quickly. So I think at that stage, like, that was the first key thing. And the second key thing is I worked a lot on my endgames, where I've mentioned before in different places that I was basically, in late 2007 already, let's say, a solid 2-400 plus strength blitz player because of working quite a lot on my openings, and I kind of knew the positions better than my opponents did and had a very good tactical vision from solving lots and lots of puzzles. But I found that what was holding me back is that I was often getting outplayed in the endgame in blitz, especially when I was playing against IMs and especially GMs. But when I started working on the endgame quite seriously, the way I do is I started by working through Silman's complete endgame course cover to cover, and that basically ensured that I knew all my basics and it covered any gaps in my basic knowledge. And then I greatly improved my practical skill by reading through the book Van Perlo's Endgame Tactics on a car trip for Christmas in 2007, where I mean back then I would travel to my family in in Melbourne, or in Victoria to be precise. And basically, they would, on that trip, I would read a chess book on the way there, and that was the book. And I basically went from being very kind of weak in endgames to it being one of my strengths, where I even managed to nearly beat the winner of the 2008 Australian Championship, Stephen Solomon, in endgame, thanks to my study. And okay, at least I had the opportunity to win the game, which I wouldn't have had if I'd not really worked on my endgames beforehand. In the end, the game ended up being a draw with black, which was still a pretty good result with my pet Sveshnikov. So that was basically the two things that got me, I think, to a raw playing strength of 2-300 plus. But then in 2008, I remember, around the middle of the year, I started to get very stressed with different things going on at school. I also had some health problems. And basically, it meant that my level kind of went back down because of this. And also in 2009, there were again a lot of issues I had at school. I think it's one thing I mentioned in different places. I was bullied quite a lot at high school, and I did have, let's say, some certain psychological impact at that time as such, where I remember, that also the second key step to really getting to the next level from 2-250 to 2-300 was kind of improving my sort of mindset during the game and my overall kind of attitude during the games. Because I remember one of the big weaknesses that I had was that if I knew my position was objectively a lot better, I would kind of look for some way to try and sort of prove it absolutely, in sort of a very scientific sort of way, rather than just playing the natural move. The normal move would have kept an advantage. I'd kind of try to force the play and then just sort of destroy my own position as such. And that was kind of a psychological weakness I had at that time, back in 2009 in particular. I remember, for example, people would exploit it by playing stuff like the modern, and I would kind of play these positions with just some non-theoretical move like knight d7 and just play some very passive kind of setup just to try to get me out of book, because I was sort of reliant quite on my narrow opening repertoire at that time and knowing it quite well. And I'd think, okay, how do I refute their play? Whereas if I had just played some normal moves, let's say just developing normally and just playing a normal sort of positional plan, as it were, for the structure, well, then I would have probably had just very good results. But I was trying to punish him and sort of basically outplaying myself in a lot of these games. So I remember in 2009, I was sort of spending a lot of time trying to learn a lot of different openings, but I was doing a little bit of a haphazard fashion where I kind of just open a book, read it, and then sort of play the line in a few tournament games. And it did lead to some temporary results. I remember, for example, I managed to draw in a 2009 Right Eastwood Open with David Smurden with black playing the modern against him, where I kind of just made him very uncomfortable and got a good game as such. But in that same time, I had a game where I played the Alekan as black against a 17-800 and ended up losing that game. So it's kind of also showing that my experiment was kind of very hit and miss at that time. But then I eventually kind of hit on the right way to approach the my openings and how to play them. And what I found worked really well was to basically switch to an approach of basically pressuring the opponent more rather than sort of playing more passively, and also basically having this psychological shift of just trying to find the best move in a given position and just trying to play a good move as such, rather than trying to refute my opponent's play or prove some evaluation. Where if I sense that my opponent made a mistake, instead of trying to refute their first mistake, I'd kind of just play sort of a move that kind of seemed right in the position after some calculation and just sort of let the play develop more organically from there. So in terms of the opening shifts I made, I think the big ones allowed me to jump from this 2-200 FIDE rank I had in late 2009 to becoming a FIDE master in 2010. Well, I remember the first step was in the Commonwealth Championship in 2009. That was really my breakthrough tournament, where I remember one thing that really helped is I was much more intentional about actually the food I was eating. Was make sure I eat the very best quality food I could for those games. And that really helped me to play a lot better, just sticking to a very clear routine of preparation, and that definitely made a big difference compared to some things I was doing before. I'd kind of just do what I felt like rather than just doing what was kind of would get me into the best state mentally for the games. So I think that the importance of routine, like that's one of the main patterns I've noticed. Whenever I've had my best tournament results, it's usually I stuck to a very strict routine and just kept following it and just felt very comfortable just doing it. Like it sort of meant that if you're not having to make a lot of decisions early in the day, then you sort of don't get that decision fatigue. So you're able to really focus then on the actual games and bring your absolute maximum without having been worn down by making a lot of decisions earlier. Because okay, I do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and then I play the game, as it were. So I think that was a big part of my success in the Commonwealth Championship. I remember at that time I also had broadened my repertoire quite a lot, where I was playing a lot of things like one knight F3 and D4 and E4. Like I played all of these moves as white in the Commonwealth Championship. As black, I remember playing things like the Slav and the Philidor and the Karakan. But you'll notice I wasn't really playing like absolute mainline systems. So I had very good results in this tournament and was only half a point off scoring my final IM norm. Off my first IM norm, rather. Well, the big breakthrough, really, I think, was the Australian Championship in 2010. Like, that was the other big breakthrough. I went from, like, this 2240 rating to, like, a 2280 rating. And the big shift and a big reason for my success there was I just made my white repertoire really strong. You see, I remember that starting in 2005, I'd been trying to learn how to play E4, but I hadn't had very good results for a couple of reasons. And one of those reasons was that, again, my style wasn't, like, very kind of organized. Like, I wasn't really mastering the different types of positions because there was just so many different types of positions to sort of learn, especially, like, switching from D4 to E4 is, like, a massive shift. But also I found was, like, there was kind of not really a sort of clear structure to my approach, where I kind of just pick up one idea from one book, one idea from another book, and there wouldn't be this kind of cohesive feel, okay, these are the sort of middle game plans I should play, and these are sort of how I should approach the rising middle game positions, because what would happen is often the book would just finish, like, quite early, or it would only show, like, one or two model games that enough to really fully understand what was going on. So a big change for me was basically, well, one of the main openings I was having trouble with in 2008, and the reason I'd stopped playing E4 for a while in 2009, was that I hadn't really found a system I liked against the Sicilian defense. But then in late 2009, this book came out called Dismantling the Sicilian, and it was based on this very clear approach of just playing the English attack, where, for those who don't know, the English attack is where you go D4, and you play the open Sicilian, but then you follow up with the kingside pawn storm. That is with something like, say, A6, and, for example, playing bishop E3 against a knight off, and then going for, like, G4, G5, and just a very direct long castling, and then a kingside pawn storm, either to attack their king if they castled short, or even just to attack in the center and pressure the kingside in general, even in anticipation of them castling short. And that shifter's approach meant that I went from kind of feeling very lost and confused in the open Sicilian positions as white, to being very, very comfortable and end up just winning, I think, every game that I played where I had the Sicilian as white in this tournament. And nearly all my opponents played the Sicilian. Like, funny enough, the one game that I lost in the event with white was the one where I played, like, one C4 and kind of deviated from my usual E4 approach, as it were. So basically, like, that was really the shift that got me to 2,500 plus, 2,300 plus. Where, yeah, my black opening still had a few challenges, but I kind of was able to play these shortcuts where I basically knew them better than my opponent. I remember, for example, in the 2010 Sydney International Open that I remember playing the Philidor against Gawain Jones. That time he was rated like nearly 2,600. And I remember that we had this game where like he played this Shirov Gambit with G4. And that was kind of the reason I played it, because not only had I studied this position quite a lot using a Christian Bauer book for black, but I also kind of felt pretty comfortable in these lines. Remember, I prepared some line where you went like C6 and go for like a B5 and Queen to A5 counterplay. Like, I'd prepared this and I basically ended up getting a winning position out of that game. And okay, I did go on to lose that game, where my results with black in this tournament were sort of kind of average, but my results with white were strong enough that I was able to basically get the points I needed to get the FIDE Master title. In fact, I remember the game where I went over 2,300 was actually my first ever win against a Grandmaster, a win of white against Daryl Johansson. And it's quite telling that actually in that game, it was a slightly different move order. He played like a Skaveningen with knight to C6. But in that game, I was basically able to use the ideas I learned from the English attack to basically be able to get a very nice win. And I mean, it was a game where, I definitely played very well, but it was also kind of easy for me to find the good moves because I knew what the middle game plans were beforehand. So those are basically the big shifts, and you could say that the things that really made the big difference was sort of broadening my understanding of like different types of positions and really learning how to play these middle game positions very well. Where I did that first of all with learning a new defense against d4 in an IMSO and Bogo Indian. And I also did that with switching from playing d4 to starting to play e4 a lot more. And playing it a lot more aggressively rather than playing these sideline systems, trying to avoid fury like I was in the previous attempts for me to try to learn e4 on my own. Definitely the shift to a more mainline and more systematic approach really paid off for me there. Also, I did change my system against e4. I remember in 2008 there was this specific line of Sveshnikov that was annoying me. I think it was like the 11c4 and 11c3 lines. I'll play it on the board so you can see what I mean, but basically there were these positions that when I was up, let's say, below 2200, I was kind of alright going into these positions where white plays just very solidly with b5, knight d5, and just plays takes, and then c3 or c4 and just gets a knight on a3 back into the game. I noticed that below 2200 I could still outplay the opponents quite a bit because I sort of had this imbalance of the bishop pair, and I'd get my counterplay with f5 in the middle game. But then what I found was when I was playing at over the 2200 level, that my opponents were just playing very safely, and it was sort of very hard for me to get the kind of active play and winning chances I was looking for. Also, I guess the fact that I didn't really feel comfortable in the positions was definitely a big factor. So I remember I kind of tried a lot of different things, and in 2009 the French was kind of my main system for a while. But I found against high-rate players, they would often just outplay me in the rising positions, where I really would struggle for the lack of space. Because often in the French, if they play like knight c3, typically they're following up with e5, and you end up in these positions where you don't really have that much space for black, and that often is an advantage, can really help you when you're playing a low-rate player. Like a space change off one of the most valuable types of advantages on a practical level, just to kind of cramp them and positionally squeeze them. So in the end, I ended up switching back to Sicilian in like late 2009, early 2010. But I remember I was playing stuff like the Taimanov a fair bit. I didn't even know that much theory, but somehow the position just seemed to play into my style, which was a bit more positional and strategic at that time. So yeah, basically those are kind of the changes I made. And of course, the specific openings that you're playing in your specific situation will be a little bit different to mine. But it shows that basically the fundamental to, I think, going from 2200 to 2300 is basically to improve your understanding quite a lot. And then basically by improving your understanding, that will come from like learning how to play different types of positions well, essentially, and broadening your opening repertoire is a very good way to do that. And also it comes down to like kind of psychology as well. I know, for example, a lot of players around 2200 to 2300 do struggle quite a bit with their time management. So definitely improving your time management and being much more efficient in your calculation and improving your overall sort of knowledge and sort of tactical vision. All those things are definitely part of it as well, but this is at least my story of how I got to this much higher level. Now, if you want to know how you can do it for yourself, how you can go from a 2100 level or a 2200 level to the next stage of being a FIDE master, or for those of you who are in, let's say, the US, you'd say a national master title, well, the best place to reach me is via Facebook, where you can always arrange to book a call with me, where we'll go deeper into how you can achieve your chess goal of becoming a master as well. So that's all for now. I'm glad that you enjoyed this video. So make sure to leave a comment as well with any feedback and any of your own experiences that you'd like to share if you like the video, and also consider subscribing to stay in touch with more of my Grandmaster Chess content. So thanks everyone for your attention, and I'll see you in the next training video.